Dale Hogg was a trailblazer and a pace setter in Tulsa in a number of ways.
He's always been a leader. He's always been a pioneer.
He was the first African American you could see on Tulsa newscasts.
Who really broke the color barrier, again, was Dale Hogg.
He did the first story in Tulsa journalism that had been done on the Tulsa race riots since the Tulsa race riots.
I would say very few people know those three very, very important areas that Dale brought to our community. I think very few.
It was at the, I believe, the 14th Annual Urban League Dinner, in which I was to give a presentation and remarks. After the dinner, there was an individual who approached myself by the name of George Stevens. He introduced himself and his wife, and he said, "You should be on television." And of course, I accepted that as a compliment, but really thought nothing about it.
I think that he offered two or three things that we as a station, as a news department, really wanted. One is he was very intelligent, he was very articulate.
A few days later, I received a call at the office, and lo and behold, it was George Stevens. He asked if I remembered him and said that he was impressed with the presentation and would like very much to talk with myself about a possibility of working at KOTV.
We were interested in a broad presentation to the community. We wanted to represent the community as it was, and Dale helped us to do that.
Well, I set the appointment, but I had no idea what I was going to do. I went to the board chairman, Max Brady, and I asked, what should I do? I mean, I'm working at the Urban League. This seems to be an opportunity, but what do you think? He said, "Are you nuts? You have to do this." He said, "This will break all sorts of barriers if this were to materialize."
The thing that was interesting to me in retrospect about someone like Dale coming in is not that he was black. It was that he was interested in doing news.
Lo and behold, I believe it was May of 1970 that I began giving the early morning news for KOTV.
And he had some realization about what that would entail in terms of his responsibility to try to tell the community what the important things were about the community so that we could all make better decisions about how to make our community better. And he was sure on board with that.
When Dale came on TV on Channel 6, he created a very positive image for the black community because of his charisma, his voice, and also, quite frankly, his looks.
I think what I remember most about Dale was the first time he arrived, and I noticed how impeccably dressed he was. He was always neat and very smart and articulate.
He was interesting, and it made you very proud to see an African-American male that was prominent in television and in the community.
Every night he would be there in the studio on Channel 6 doing a story.
And as a result of seeing Dale on TV and seeing him as a newscaster and also as a weather person, created a different image for the city, especially in the early 1970s.
I honestly believe that doors were opened because of that exposure.
And I just remember he was so natural. He was very good at what he did. And what I really specifically remember was his mustache and his afro, or his natural. So he was allowed to be fully himself, and he was just a natural on-air talent.
A natural newsman. To me, he was very natural, and Clayton was very good at hiring people by gut, and he was usually right about that. But Dale was one of those that was probably one of the greatest hires he ever made.
After Dale and I got married, ironically, we moved into our first home. We never rented, and I think it's because we were forced into that kind of a situation. There were not apartments available for minorities at that time. And when we walked into the house, I remember Dale saying to me, this will not be our only home. We're only going to be here a few years. And I thought he was nuts, because our parents obviously had lived in their homes all of their lives. Nobody moved around. You know, you got a house, that's where you stayed. And he was always thinking ahead.
Well, Tulsa was rigidly segregated. Archer was the northern boundaries, and no black lived across Archer.
Faye and I considered moving south.
We now have 2 children, so we started to look south. Now, South Tulsa at the time, to my knowledge, did not have any minorities living in the area. And that turned out to be more of a challenge than we had obviously anticipated. We started looking, and we had doors closed in our face. We had realtors who would open up the blinds and see that we were a black couple, and they would not open the door, or they would simply say the house wasn't for sale anymore, it had sold.
There was still an attitude that was very, you have your part of town, we have our part of town.
Even though the anti-housing laws had passed, there still was no blacks past Archer. And nobody would sell, even though it was against the law.
There was always some reason to keep an individual out of those opportunities.
We visited some friends of ours. Dale was at KOTV at the time, that invited us out to dinner. On our way back home, we noticed this property that we both fell in love with it from the outside. We thought, here we go again, we'll never get this house probably. And so I called on it, and the lady was very gracious over the phone, and I thought, okay, what is she going to do when we drive up? And we got to the property, and we were welcomed inside. The agent was from Chicago, and I thought, well, this might be an opportunity for us to put an offer on the house. We both loved it.
Who really broke the color barrier, again, was Dale Hogg.
And once we signed the contract, I guess word got out that we had bought in a predominantly white neighborhood, and they started a petition to keep us out.
Dale Hogg was the first black to buy a home in Tulsa past, I guess, 31st or 41st Street.
It was a challenge that we rose to. I think had an effect on.
So I don't know how Dale got that done, but he did.
If I hadn't had the opportunity, someone else would have. But I happened to be the lucky one with timing, which timing, in my opinion, is everything. It was in the right place at the right time.
When I see my kids living south now, I know that at one time, that would not have been allowed by the law.
And I asked him about that once. He says, well, I've got to admit that it certainly could be considered progress when a black man like me can go jogging through a neighborhood and the neighbors don't call the police.
And I think it opened a whole lot of doors and tore down a whole lot of barriers that African Americans are enjoying today.
To fully understand the impact that Dale made on Tulsa journalism is you have to go back, and the best illustration I can make of that is when I was an intern with the Tulsa Tribune, had to be the mid-'60s, and somewhere along the line someone had mentioned to me Tulsa's race riots, and I grew up in Tulsa. I took Oklahoma history, which was a required course in the 8th grade. Tulsa's race riots, what's that? And I went to the city editor and I said, have we ever done anything on Tulsa's race riots? We don't talk about that. No, no.
The white community went into a conspiracy of silence. You wasn't allowed to talk about the riot.
Tulsa's race riots of 1921 were not talked about in impolite or polite company, period.
It was not talked about. It was not read about.
It was a blank page in Tulsa's history.
Don came to me with a thought. He said, we're in the Urban League. We should have even more impact on the community.
Dale and I and a couple others developed Impact Magazine.
Well, we came up with the idea of telling the community in the state of Oklahoma about that race riot. And we did it through this magazine called Impact.
Dale's contribution, he commissioned a local writer to do the first story in Tulsa journalism that had been done on the Tulsa race riots since the Tulsa race riots.
We put together this magazine and dedicated that issue to the race riot.
And as a result, the first time that the race riot was really publicly noted was in that magazine.
We printed the story of the riot in Impact Magazine that became an instant bestseller.
We felt a necessity to let, first of all, the black community of Tulsa know what has happened in the past, what we have had to deal with in terms of potentially rebuilding.
And to that point, nobody knew about the Tulsa race riot. I'd only heard about it when I was 16. Nobody would talk about it.
Suddenly, it could be talked about.
It was a long, hard history.
Even today, you cannot see a documentary about the race riot that doesn't quote Impact Magazine.
One can be saddened even talking about it, but at the same time, to be enlightened brings hope for now and the future.
I think that story in Impact Magazine ultimately led to the call for reparations and the Reconciliation Park and all the things surrounding the riot that's happening in this town as we see it today.
And without Dale's pace-setting, trailblazing journalism in that instance, who knows where we'd be in regard to that.
My daughter is very shy. She was 3.5 years old, and we wanted her in an environment that she would actually be learning. We received a flyer in the mail advertising it as an educational preschool situation, which attracted me right away. So I called the school, and the lady was very courteous over the phone, and she said she'd be willing to meet with my husband, Dale, and I.
We took our daughter with us, and on arrival at the preschool,
she met us outside. We never got to set foot in the school. And she said, "I'm sorry, when I spoke with you on the phone, I didn't realize you were colored."
But our parents are not going to be happy about having a black student in the school. I just can't do it. And of course, the question that I raised was, why not?
She proceeded to say that she couldn't accept our child into her school because she would lose too much business.
Meanwhile, our daughter is playing with her daughter in the front yard.
We both were there standing outside in shock.
But she went on to say that I'm certain that you're accustomed to having these rejections. And I said, "Ma'am, I am sorry, but quite to the contrary. That's not the case."
We left and we were like in shock.
So I decided I would go to the Human Relations Commission in the city of Tulsa, filed a charge of discrimination against the school.
We went ahead and pursued and took it to court.
The case was taken forward. We had hearings of which I had to testify.
And it was not an easy task to do that. It took 2 years. It was 2 years in the process. It didn't happen overnight. It took him taking off work to be at the court cases, the hearings. It made the news. And we also got hate mail. You know, we could have dropped it and we could have gone on, but we just thought it was important.
It proved that, in fact, she had been discriminatory towards our daughter, and the case moved forward.
The court ruled in our favor. They cannot discriminate in a private school situation.
And that lawsuit went all the way to the state Supreme Court, and he was a winner of the lawsuit. And as a result of discriminating against a child in the nursery school, that was really history-making here in the city of Tulsa.
But what it did do is what we wanted to accomplish, that no child should be discriminated against for the color of their skin.
And is now on the law books in the state of Oklahoma.
And you know, it was a lesson also for our children.
So I was that 3-year-old little girl that was in the lawsuit, and I think it's good to have a face with that, because so many things happen through the years, and you know, this is what I've grown up with, and it's part of my history, it's part of my family's history, it's part of Oklahoma's history.
And the shock and the awe of her turning us down like that, and had no shame in doing so. And even in the court case, when she testified, yes, I did turn them down. So she had no remorse even for what she had done. Ironically, the school within a year was closed because of health issues. The health department closed them down.
And so it was an experience for us that we would rather not have had, but at the same time, it set a tone whereby it would not occur again.
Change only comes if you make an effort. And we had to make that effort to make it, to right a wrong.
I met Dale Hogg in about 42 years ago in 1975. He was an employee at the Williams Companies.
Dale also became the first black executive with a Fortune 500 company.
And basically in the early 70s, the only corporate manager who was black in Tulsa.
We all saw Dale as a mentor, and we respected him highly.
But the role he played as a role model to white people as well as black people, if you will.
He was a significant example for young people to follow. And of course, I'm 2 years older than Dale, I think, and he was my mentor.
He taught me to see the bigger picture, to ask the right questions, and to come up with a plan.
Dale was an important figure in integrating housing in the city of Tulsa. He certainly broke the barrier in the executive suite, and he opened the media for African Americans.
For every black journalist that followed in Tulsa, for every black corporate manager that followed in Tulsa, and for white Tulsa to better understand equal employment opportunity.
I believe Dale Hogg was an important member of this community because he saw what Tulsa could become, and he fought for Tulsa to be the best community it could be.
And those are things that just have lasting impact.